So Alex Crochet is the city horticulturist in Colorado Springs. And he's had a number of positions at different nurseries throughout the state of Colorado. And as he says that he's done just about every job that there is to do in Colorado in horticulture. And since he's been there at the city greenhouses, he's been doing some innovative work with the propagation of native plants, not only from seed, not only growing them from seed, but also growing them from cuttings. And so with that, I am going to mute myself and turn the meeting over to Alex.
All right, thank you, Anne. Let me share my screen here with everybody. Let's see. All right, a little background about city horticulture in Colorado Springs. I'll kind of start with that. So horticulture in Colorado Springs has been kind of an important staple since General Palmer began Colorado Springs. He was actually an avid horticulturist himself. And so in Colorado Springs, there's actually quite a bit of laws that are written by Palmer stating that certain areas throughout town need to have a specific aesthetic. And over the years, that was sort of translated and understood as annuals only. So as you'll see in this picture, I grow 65,000 annuals from seed every year. And that takes me from about the end of January until we can plant them after the last frost date in Colorado Springs. That's around Mother's Day. So I've got 6 total greenhouses that I'm so fortunate to grow in. And after all the annuals are done, these greenhouses just sit empty and have historically sat empty. So I began with the city of Colorado Springs last November. So I've been there just over a year now. And it really kind of struck me odd that these greenhouses sit put and just empty the way they do. So I began to play with propagation and understand kind of what works and what doesn't in regards to native plants and some perennials, but I'm largely focusing on native plants. So I propagate year round, which is kind of different than a lot of people are used to. And we've produced since last July about 10,000 native plants that are very sizable and very nice looking in a range of sizes. And we've played with a range of soil mixes in order to get a really good product. The point of producing all of this native plant material is that I not only want to sort of change the way we think of the aesthetic in Colorado Springs, instead of all of these annuals that need a lot of water, we can start to think about a more xeric palette that suits the city better. But also, I want to be able to grow plant material for revegetation purposes as well. And something that's always kind of struck me is when we take a nursery grown plant, often in a peat or a coconut coir, and put that in the ground, it's just not going to survive the transplanting well in Colorado. So I began to play with the soil mixes quite a bit. And I kind of think that that's the main secret to what we're doing here. So my crew has gone throughout the city, and we're really lucky in Colorado Springs because we have a ton of open space and trails just within the city. And we've really studied all of the different ecosystems in order to produce plants that I think will survive the transplanting process pretty well. So here's my little crew at the city. There's 4 of us, or 5 of us total, including myself. And we've collected seed from all over Colorado Springs. Another thing that is important to note in Colorado Springs is that we have a huge array of different ecosystems in Colorado Springs. You know, we have the top of Pikes Peak, so we have some alpine, and then we have very dry space. We have lots of riparian areas and canyons as well. So we have a great diversity in Colorado Springs, and we're definitely learning how to propagate all different types of plant material so we can revegetate all different parts of the city. So here you can start to see a little bit of our soil mix, and that's where I'm going to start. And I'm going to bounce back and forth while I talk and kind of go through different slides. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll check that every once in a while. But I've lived here my whole life, and as I've thought about it some, I've begun to realize, you know, we live somewhere that has very rocky soil, especially in the Garden of the Gods. You'll find plants that are almost entirely lithophytic, meaning that they're growing just straight out of cracks in sandstone with pretty much no organic material. So you can see in these wheelbarrows here, we started to play with different soil mixes, and we found that red breeze, which is a type of a road base or a trail base, has given us some of the best results. So I've kind of broken it down into two separate mixes. We've got the riparian species mix, and then we've got the more arid or xeric plants. And what changes is the ratio of compost to breeze. So with our riparian plants, we're heavily using compost. I'd say like 60% compost to 40% breeze. And then for our more arid plants, we're doing higher breeze and lower organic material. Another thing that's important to note with grasses, and Maggie pointed this out to me, is as grasses grow and then fall dormant, they create a lot of organic material for themselves. So we've changed our grass mix quite a bit, and we're actually using the same as the riparian, so 60% compost to 40% red breeze for our grasses, and we've seen really good results so far. So red breeze is available to us. You can see in this photo, it looks like what we walk on the trails. But this is available to us in many different names from bulk material yards throughout the state. So I believe Pioneer is a chain that's all throughout the state. You can get a red breeze from there. CNC is where I buy mine in Colorado Springs, and there may be more locations in the state as well. Sometimes it's called Cimarron breeze, but really what you're looking for is a breeze mix or a road base, and it's really heavy. So that's the one drawback that we found with it, but we're finding pretty amazing growth rates happening and germination rates happening out of this mix. So in this photo, you can see willows. These are cuttings that we took, and we're pretty much cutting them, putting a little bit of rooting hormone and sticking them straight in there, and then watering these regularly. And from a dormant stick to a small shrub or tree like this, we're looking at probably about 3 or 4 weeks. So it's happening really fast. And you'll see in some of the little willow whips on the right side, the more red colored ones, I'll actually defoliate some of these cuttings so they have the chance to regenerate a new batch of leaves. And that is allowing the plant to also focus on root growth for a little while before it begins to put the leaves out. So I grow, like we said earlier, I grow from both cuttings and from seeds. And this batch that you'll see here in pots was the first attempt that we made December of last year when we began to propagate some of this plant material. And it was largely a commercial potting soil, so peat, perlite, and then I added some gravel and I added some sand. So that's where the idea began to form. And we had really good germination rates. Sadly, we lost a lot of this plant material in a fire that happened in our greenhouses. And that's when I really began to rely more on that breeze mix. And we've entirely cut peat moss out of our soil mix for our native plants at the city. Here, I'm going to check the comments real quick. So what type of soil would you use for plants that grow in heavy clay? So your answer is kind of in the question right there. So for plants that grow in heavy clay, I would buy clay from your bulk yard. That's probably going to be more along the lines of your riparian plants, but you can make almost any soil mix from these commercial soil yards, and they have just sand, they have just clay. So I would really encourage everybody to pay attention to what the soil looks like when you're out hiking, because that will really tell you what it grows best in the first place. So Breeze is spelled B-R-E-Z-E, that is correct. So far, we do not put any fertilizer in our potting mix. So in our soil mixes, it is literally just the compost and our Breeze. Now, the compost that we use is made out of all of the annuals that I grow. So in the past, the city used to collect all of these annuals and they would throw them in the dumpsters. Instead, I've taken all this plant material at the end of the season and I've turned it into compost. So technically, there is some fertilizer in there, but that's because the annuals that we compost are pretty heavily fertilized in order to get a sizable plant. But we don't put any extra fertilizer in. It's just the compost that we buy. I have not tried crushed granite for higher altitude plants yet. Right now in the springs, we're really trying to focus specifically on the plants immediately in the greater Colorado Springs area. So we haven't done a whole lot with the high altitude plants yet. But as we start to make some conversions throughout the city and add native plants around the city, we can begin to play around a little bit more with some of those higher altitude plants, and we'll definitely try crushed granite. I mean, I really think part of the secret here is just paying attention to what these plants are growing in and then trying to copy that. So the first attempt, it looked really good, but there was the peat moss in it. And then we started to change and just do the breeze and compost. So here's a good picture of that. Now, one thing that I'm also trying to do at the city is kind of cut plastic back as much as I can. So we've experimented quite a bit with these soil blocks. The soil blocks have been really great for us, and we've had really, really successful germination rates for some plants, not all. So you can see I've got some plastic pots and also some soil blocks. And there are just things that don't like to grow in the soil blocks. So we're finding that columbines, penstemons, things that you'll often find on slopes are doing wonderfully in these soil blocks. And then more of our wet or riparian plants are doing better in the plastic pots. So there will be a place for both of them in our grow operation, but I'm especially excited about the soil blocks because it's really saving a ton of plastic. And we're actually seeing better rates of germination and growth in some of our soil blocks than if a columbine was grown side by side in a pot. You can also see different colors here. So we've tried different brands of breeze. I really don't think it matters a whole lot. There are some sandier breezes that you could certainly use for sandier plants, like if you were out east in the prairie. But you'll also see some of these plants have quite a bit of compost in that soil block. So we've had good success with both the arid or xeric soil mix and the riparian mix in the soil blocks, but just not all the plants like to grow in the soil blocks. As we go along in the photo, I'll try and find, there's a great photo of a soil block that has a plant in it with a taproot that's already about 3 feet long. So it's really impressive how well some of these plants are growing. So here you can see in this photo we've grown fern bush from seed, and since this photo's been taken, all of these fern bushes have actually been up potted into a 5-gallon pot. So we're finding with this red breeze mix that we're using, from the seed germinating to a 5-gallon pot, we're getting pretty quick. And I think it's because we've got a really loose soil mix. It drains well, but that top forms a nice crust. And it doesn't let any other weeds or anything compete with some of these plants. So that's been interesting to see. You can see behind the fern bush in those trays, we have equisetium growing. So we collected that from a very wet riparian area in Cheyenne Canyon, and it's growing just as happily. Really, there's nothing that isn't happy growing in this mix. Even things that aren't native, like purple coneflower, have shown really good growth and germination rates in this red breeze mix that we're using. So if you have to buy compost, I recommend a brand? I personally wouldn't use anything in a bag. Even though these are called bulk soil yards, you can take a 5-gallon bucket or like a Rubbermaid tote to these soil yards and fill that up. And all of these soil yards will have a trimix or just a straight compost that you can use. And I would recommend that just because it's going to save you plastic, and it's going to be wildly cheaper than a bag of soil. I think a bag of soil these days is probably going to go for $15 or $20. And a 5-gallon bucket of compost at one of these soil yards is going to cost you a couple bucks maybe. So look for your local bulk soil yard and see what they have as far as compost. Also, ask them if they're using animal manure in it, because animal manure is going to add a decent amount of salinity to your pots. So try and avoid anything with chicken manure, but something like goat manure would be great. That's a cold manure that you could use. I think they also make composts that are just made out of like cotton burrs or things like that. So you don't have to use an animal product. So here you can see blue flax. Blue flax has honestly been one of our germination rock stars. And we've produced about 3,000 just of the blue flax. So we've done it in both the soil blocks and the pots. It's happy in both. Now all of these plants that you see are fully grown out in 1-gallon pots, and they're overwintering in cold frames. So I let them get as cold as they get outside, but then that cold frame is going to allow me to have a little bit of extra time in the spring where my plant material can get a little bit bigger, because I want to see the largest plant that I can grow before I end up putting it out in a median. Gaillardia is another great one that we've had in these soil blocks. So I definitely recommend it. I think they're becoming kind of trendy. I'm sure that soil blocks have been around for a long time, but I'm starting to see growers experiment quite a bit with them now. So you can actually use a heavier compost with no breeze to make the soil block as well. And you'll see ours are round. I'm seeing now on the market square ones, and they'll make ones that are like full flats. And I think that those are definitely a little bit easier to use because we have to kind of squish each one of these individually into a little sandcastle. So we're going to play around with the soil blockers that we use and see if the square ones work a little better for us. What do you mix into the soil block to make them stick together? So we use no peat and no coir. The breeze has a decent amount of clay in it, and then we've got the compost as well. So really it's just the breeze and compost, and the breeze will be made up of rock or crusher fines, sand, and clay. So we're adding nothing other than those two things. We're just kind of changing how much compost versus how much red breeze we use. So in this Gaillardia, for example, this is 60% red breeze and 40% compost. So it's actually pretty dry, but we make sure to wet this down really well before we start to make these little sandcastle shapes. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about stratification techniques. So, here, let me answer this question real quick. What are you using for soil blocks and where do you get them? One year I used a repurposed cookie press. Worked great, but small block, 2 inches across. Yeah, you can use whatever. The soil blocks that we have right now, we bought from a local garden center, and it literally just looks like a little, it's exactly that shape with a little handle that you press down. But you could use anything. You could use a cup or a glass to make the shape. You could probably make something similar out of cardboard as well, but we are using a soil block maker from a garden center. So stratification, I think, is kind of the other part of this that is really important. So I've tried a few different stratification techniques, and I'm trying some more this winter because I think, especially as a homeowner, we're exactly in the time where we should be stratifying our seeds right now. So I've had seed from Maggie that's been stratified in her garage. That's a lot of what you see here. So that was dry, cold stratification in an outdoor location. I've also been stratifying seeds in the freezer and the fridge. I've been stratifying seeds with the sous vide. A few years back, I saw somebody on Facebook and they tried stratifying their seeds in a sous vide. So that's a good option for people who didn't have the time to do a cold stratification either outside or in the freezer, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think the best way for us to stratify our seeds is outside right now. So a lot of this seems maybe a little daunting because we're doing it on a commercial scale in a greenhouse, but I really want to stress to the home grower that this is very feasible outside. So you can fill up pots or you can make soil blocks right now. You're going to put your seed in that soil block or in that pot, wet it down and plant it like you would in the summer, and just let it sit outside and freeze solid. That way you have to do nothing to it other than wait for springtime, and as temperatures warm, you can start to water a little bit, and we may see germination as soon as the seed is ready. Let me see here in the chat. So it says, how do you water the soil block without the soil eroding away? We just have a really gentle spray nozzle on our hoses. We've also used like a mist nozzle, but we have no problem with them falling apart. Even when we move them around and handle them, they are pretty stable and haven't had any issues with crumbling. So just a really gentle spray on that water. We also use drip emitters that have a mister emitter on the top of it if we're using an automated system, but we really have not had any issues with them falling apart. And then Anne said she saw that I had Corylus cornuta nuts. Did they need stratification? How long? So I collected those nuts probably around end of September this year in Cheyenne Canyon. And I've had them in the fridge in cold, dry stratification up until this week. They're coming out this week, and we'll take that cold, dry strated hazelnut and we'll put that into moistened soil in a germination tent that we make, and then we'll put it on a heat mat to get those to pop. So they've been in since September. So the soil blocks, this question is, the soil blocks are 60% compost and 40% breeze. So that mix right there would be for riparian plants or wet loving plants. So for the Corylus cornuta, for example, that Anne was talking about above, that would be the 60% compost to 40% breeze. However, in the photo that you're looking at that I'm sharing right now for those columbines, that would actually be 60% breeze and 40% compost. So we're using the same numbers, we're just flip-flopping them for wet and dry. So here you can see some more of our ratibotas that we've grown in the pots, and we've since learned that they do the best in soil blocks as well. Whoops. And here you can see a mix. So to continue with the stratification techniques, the freezer is what we use in the summertime. If we have seed that's been given to us, leftover seed, that kind of stuff, we'll put it in the freezer. The sous vide is for if I want to get it to pop now. So the sous vide method is pretty clever. Somebody on Facebook recommended it, and you cook your seeds in the sous vide. It warms the water to 110 degrees. And then I put the seeds in little seed baggies and filled those seed baggies up with water. And I wrote on Sharpie, I wrote with Sharpie on the outside of the bag to denote what was what. And for 12 hours, I let the seeds simmer in that 110-degree water. And that had decent germination rates for us. But I would say the best germination rates that we have seen would be outside. So the seed that Maggie gave me that cold stratted in her garage was the best so far. And this year we've kept all of our seed that we've collected in a shed that is unheated and uninsulated. And we'll start to take that out of the shed in the next few weeks and propagate some of that stuff. But I really would say the best method for the homeowner is to just put it in the breeze, put the seed in, get it wet, and let it freeze outside and wake up with the seasons. I really think that it'll surprise people how well that would work. Here's a picture of that soil block, and here's the soil ratios so everybody can see. And we've since kind of changed the dryer land from 80 to 20. The 80-20, I'd say, is what we use for cactus. So we've taken quite a few cactus cuttings this summer, and we just lay those cladodes that we cut straight on the 80% to 20%. But I'd say largely we're kind of cooking more with 60% of the breeze and 40% of the compost. So here you can see how long these roots get when they're growing not in a pot, pretty much. They will just kind of circle in the bottom of the tray that we keep them in, but I've never seen a plant, honestly, look this good, this small at a nursery. Nurseries hardly even sell. I'd say this would be the equivalent of a 4-inch pot. At least the nurseries down in Colorado Springs, they don't really sell 4 inches very much. But for the size of the plant and the size of the root, this is without a doubt some of the best plant material that I've seen. And I've worked in quite a few nurseries over the years. We're also seeing, once we up pot this into a 1-gallon pot, which is kind of the most common size that we up pot in, that they explode once they have more soil space for the roots to move around in. So we really are producing a huge plant. And the root system is what you're paying for at a garden center. So this is really encouraging for me, and we're really excited to see how things are overwintering with a root system like this. But yeah, this is just really incredible, and I'm really excited that we're able to produce plant material with roots this strong. You see in the chat here. Do I pot up in the same mix, just a bigger pot? Yep. So I have not overwintered any of the soil blocks. All of my soil blocks I've up potted into a bigger pot at this point. I don't know how they would hold up to I'm just ignoring this plant material once I take it out. So once it sits outside, it is just survival of the fittest, and we did decide to up pot all of them, but we're using the same exact soil mix throughout. We've also dug a lot of plant material from the field. So all this plant material that you see, the Artemisia, Maggie and myself actually dug with some of her students and my staff. Colorado Springs is growing its trail system quite a bit. So we're digging this plant material up and putting it in the red breeze mix that we're germinating things in. And these Artemisia looked pitiful when we pulled them out of the ground. They were really sad looking. And now they're in these 1-gallon pots and they got gigantic. Granted, we water everything regularly. And I think that that's something to note here too, is even though we have all these xeric species, they'll gladly take the water if they can get it. So this plant material that's been sitting in the greenhouse has been receiving regular water, but it is growing so incredibly happy and not even skipping a beat really when we put it in this soil mix. So that was a good test for me to decide whether or not the plant material that I'm growing and germinating could go out into the field. And we've since taken all of the plant material in this photo and we've actually revegetated about 3 different trails throughout Colorado Springs. And we have GPS location data with every single thing that we've planted. So we know exactly where everything is, thanks to some really awesome park rangers down in the Springs. So we're actually able to go back this winter and monitor, and also this summer and monitor to see what our success rates look like. And so far, we're having really good looking plant material in the winter. Our buds are setting properly, and everything seems really happy. So I'm excited that we have some location data so we can actually start to prove to ourselves that we're doing the right soil mix here. Okay, so Chris says, I made a lot of small 1-inch soil blocks and 1/2-inch soil blocks to maximize space. Would these be too small? All your soil blocks are much larger. So here's what I have found. Almost all of these plants have a taproot, and it's really important that the taproot has space to grow. So I'll talk about milkweed as an example here. Milkweed is never really super good looking in the pot. I've seen it in a lot of different places, and I've never seen a milkweed that's like, wow, I want to buy that and take that home. So we started the milkweed actually in a different manner than everything else. We take our milkweed seeds and we soak the seed and let that seed actually germinate in the water. And then we take every seed of the milkweed that's been planted, or I'm sorry, that's been germinated, and then we plant it into little soil blocks. And a week later, we have to up pot it into a larger soil block. So Chris, if you're going to have a 1-inch or a 1/2-inch soil block, be prepared to up pot really quick. We've since moved to some commercial pots that are really long and narrow and skinny, so we have a little bit more time for that taproot to form. But you absolutely can use smaller soil blocks. Just get ready to transplant quick because the roots really do grow fast. So once we take our little milkweed from the plug, we put it in a 4-inch. In another week or two, we take that 4-inch and we put it in a gallon, and the root system will fill out the gallon really fast, and the plant will still only be this big. So I think that it's really important to give these roots as much space as possible right off the bat, so we know we can form really strong roots. Here's a picture of our compost pile. This was the first compost pile that we started with. And now we have 4 compost piles going. So this is literally just the annual plant material that gets thrown away every year. And there's enough nitrogen in there that we're getting this chemical reaction to still happen. We've also since partnered with local coffee shops, and we're getting their grounds for our compost piles. So we are not putting any nitrogen fertilizer whatsoever into these compost piles. Cool. So Anne said that there are YouTube videos about water germination of milkweed. It really is the way to go. It's so much easier to germinate milkweed in water. So there's a photo of what that compost looks like that we're using. Did you have better success with the penstemons with dry or moist stratification? All of our stratification techniques are dry. We haven't put anything in a wet paper towel in the fridge or anything like that because I don't have the manpower really to monitor for mold or anything like that. So all stratification is just in bags in the fridge or in the freezer or outside. We haven't done anything wet. We have been selected to do a huge riparian project in the city. So we'll be growing about 10,000 riparian plugs this year of native plant material, and currently it's dry stratifying in the fridge, but I think I will try putting that into a very wet soil and letting it freeze outside for another month, just because that makes sense in my head that it would be a little bit wetter for some of our riparian species that live in the marginal areas of a pond, but otherwise I'm keeping everything dry. So here's that picture initially of all of these Artemisia that we dug. So you can see how scraggly they looked. And then all of these cladodes or these pads off of these prickly pears. And then we put them in our soil mix and they grew crazy big. We probably got about 150 cactus pads here in this photo. We cut them apart and just lay them directly onto the breeze mix. And weeks again, we're getting root systems and we're able to move this plant material out. So it really is happening fast for us. We are watering everything pretty regularly once it's germinated, with the exception of the cactus. I don't want to give them any extra water because they're going to go in some of our driest areas in Colorado Springs. So here you can see the cuttings of the cactus. We cut them apart even further once we got them to the greenhouse and just laid them right onto the breeze. And this actually does look like it has a little bit of compost in it. We've since moved just to the breeze for the cactus. So Anne asked, I heard about the milk jug method of growing seed. What is that? So the milk jug method is something that I'm not super familiar with, to be honest. I know pretty much the concept of it is to plant your seed inside the milk jug and let the milk jug act as a little greenhouse. I'm not sure that I'm super in love with it, to be honest, just because I've learned over this past year that these plants need so much space for their roots to grow. So I'm curious to see, we're hosting an event down in Colorado Springs on the 17th at the municipal greenhouses, where people will be bringing milk jugs to try that milk jug method, where they pretty much put the seed in the milk jug and stick that outside and let it germinate. So I'm curious to see how some of our native plants do in the milk jug, just because I imagine we've got a pretty shallow area for the roots to grow. But it is a method that works for people. So I'm definitely not going to discredit it by any means, but I imagine that the plants are going to want more root room. So here we'll go back a couple. So on the left, those are the Artemisia and the soil, very dry. And then this is what happened when we put them into the red breeze and gave them a little bit of water. And there's me and Maggie. So I'd like to ask, or I'd like to answer any more questions that people could possibly have. That's about everything that I have, but I would definitely love to just kind of help people out and answer any other questions. I'm not, here we go. How often do you have to water your cold frames in the winter? So we're watering everything that's sitting outside about once a month. If our temperatures were higher and we were in the 40s and 50s a little bit more, I'd say twice a month. But for right now, once a month has been plenty for us. I'm still seeing really good buds and everything. Any hints about outdoor stratification in windy areas? What will happen to the well water plants once they are planted out and don't get as much water? Okay, so I'm going to start with any hints about the stratification in windy areas. I think the soil mix is so heavy. If you put it in pots, it won't blow away. And that really is the worst part about the soil mix that we're using is it is super heavy because it is rock and clay pretty much. But so far, we live in a very windy spot. Nothing has shifted or moved at all for us outside. So I think if you use the soil mix, you won't have to worry about the wind too bad. I would recommend maybe putting a little bit of sand over the top of the pots as a mulch rather than like leaves or pine needles, so nothing blows away off of the top. But the soil mix is heavy enough that it doesn't move. So Alice said, what will happen to the well-watered plants once they are planted out and don't get as much water? So I harden everything off before we give this to the rangers, Alice. So we knew around August that September the rangers would likely be coming to retrieve the plant material and put it back out. So we'll either move it outside and completely cut the irrigation back, or if it's in a riparian area, we'll continue to water regularly. But just as a garden center would harden off an annual or a tomato or something like that, we'll put them out where it's windy and we'll give them less water so they can slowly get used to the conditions before they go back out. We're kind of heavily watering in their youngest stages, and then we give them the cold, mean, hard treatment, and we don't give them much cushy life after that. Where do you plant the native plants that you grow? So a lot of the plant material so far has been planted by the rangers, but we are starting to pare back the annuals that we grow. So at the beginning, I said we're growing about 65,000 annuals a year. We're starting to slowly cut that back and replace some of these areas with native plants rather than annuals. And we're doing it slowly so the town can get used to the visual of the native plants. But we'll be putting them in parks. We're putting them in the administration buildings. We're putting them in neighborhoods. We're really going to start to be smart about water-wise plants and native plants at the city of Colorado Springs. Anne Marie said, do you let the soil blocks fully dry between watering once you get past the first 2 sets of leaves? I had issues with mine falling apart when they got too dry and then I watered. We don't let them fully dry out when they're in the greenhouses. We'll let them get pretty dry, but I'd say the bottom is still going to have a little bit of moisture in it, Anne Marie. And then when we move things outside, we do let them fully dry, but often they're going to be in a 1-gallon pot at that point. Annette said, do you have a list or source for which mix to use for various seeds or how we might find that info? Okay, so that's a great question. The city has never had an inventory system, and that's something that we're working on creating right now, is building an inventory system so we can start to really track and build data behind things. So I currently don't have a list, but it's something that we're going to be working on as soon as I start implementing this inventory system. And I am on the horticulture board for CONIPS, so I'll definitely make sure that all of the different chapters can get that list once we begin to build a little bit of data for us. Let's see. Anne said, what natives have you grown from cuttings? Okay, so many species of salix or willow. Cottonwood is another great one that we've done from cuttings. Obviously the prickly pears, the cactus we've done by cutting. But actually some of my rock stars that we've done by cuttings are the more xeric shrubs. So 4-wing saltbrush will go from an unrooted cutting to a fully rooted 1 gallon in about 5 weeks. Rabbit brush we've had really good success with. Oak we've had success with, Gamble oak, but it's very slow. And I have not had good success with the conifers by cuttings. I'm trying to think if there's any other cuttings that we've done. Done a little bit of the corylus by cutting, but it was slow to move. And I think those are the main ones right now. We just collected some mountain mahogany that we'll be doing by cutting, but I prefer to do mountain mahogany by seed. And I definitely recommend next time you guys are out hiking, grab a mountain mahogany seed and put it in a pot and water it. You can watch that tail slowly unfurl and actually bury it into the soil. It's pretty cool to watch. See, Emma said, when can you start taking cuttings in the spring? What plants do better from cuttings? So really, I think the willow and the cottonwood were just so easy. We've also done sumac from cutting. And then, like I said, the 4-wing saltbrush and the rabbit brush. I would not recommend take cuttings in the spring. I would take cuttings now. I've learned that it's really easy to break a plant's dormancy period by taking a cutting and bringing it somewhere warm. So if you have somewhere warm inside some lights, you can take that cutting now and root it, and that'll pop pretty quick. We've also had good luck with golden currant and a few different ribes species by cutting as well. But I really think the best time to do cuttings is take it dormant and wake it up with warmth. What are some of my favorite native flowers, shrubs, or trees? That's a very hard question. I have a lot of favorites, but lately I've been really interested in the native cactus that we have, the native yuccas that we have as well. I think they're really interesting. I also think buckwheats are awesome. Maggie loves snowberry. I love the sumac species that we have here. I love to eat the berries. I think they're delicious. The birds eat them. They're super xeric. But really, in Colorado Springs, the shrubs are the showstoppers down here. We have a really awesome assortment of shrubs that grow down here. Rabbit brush, winter fat. So I really am partial to a lot of the shrubs. Let's see here. Denise, sounds like the plants have a large root system compared to other nurseries that use potting soil. I've heard that bare root planting can be good for many natives that have been grown in potting soil. With your method, is there any trimming of roots soaking before planting? Nope, we aren't doing any of that. I would absolutely agree that bare rooting nursery plants, if they've been grown in potting soil, is the move if you're going to be planting natives from the nursery. But we are just digging a hole and plopping the plant, roots and crusher fines and all. See, Alice said, have you used crushed pecan shells as mulch? I have not used crushed pecan shells as mulch. I'm really trying to focus on sourcing what I can here in Colorado Springs. And I don't know that pecan shells are super available to us here. So all of the plant material that I'm overwintering right now, if it's in a pot, I cover with a little bit of Gamble oak leaves that we collect, but otherwise don't do much mulch on them. Debbie said Rocky Mountain maple from cuttings. Have I done that? I have done that. And the Rocky Mountain maple was successful from cuttings. I found with a lot of the cuttings that are riparians, so the Rocky Mountain maple is a great example. We have a lot in riparian areas in Cheyenne Canyon here in Colorado Springs. You can root that first in water. And then once it's fully rooted, then you can transplant that into the crusher fines. So the Rocky Mountain maple had rooted in water for us. Willows and cottonwoods have rooted in water for us. And sumac has rooted in water for us as well. Are there any natives that go from seed to flower in 1 year? Honestly, I think that a lot of our plants would go from seed to flower in 1 year. That's excluding biennials, of course, that just physically don't do that. But had I started the plant material earlier last year, I'm confident that we would have had a lot of flowers on them. For example, our Gaillardia, especially in our rudbeckias that we started, flowered in their first year, no problem. Maggie said, shout out to Aiken Audubon. We received an Aiken Audubon grant that is supporting these efforts to propagate woody plants for riparian habitat. Yeah, first of all, I want to say that we would not have been able to do any of this without Maggie and her awesome students. she has been an integral part of the successes that we've had here at the city. So I am so grateful to her and to the Aiken Audubon Society for their money, because they have helped us with soil. And it's just been absolutely wonderful. Yes. Maggie and I had a successful event in August, was it? There was about 60 people that showed up, so that was wonderful. And we're hoping to see quite a few of you guys in Colorado Springs on the 17th as well. But my supervisors at the city are really excited about the changes that we're making, and they're definitely encouraging us to have people over to the greenhouses and have events. So we'll certainly be having some events down in Colorado Springs. I'm in Monument. I'm not sure the soil here is as rocky as Colorado Springs. Forest soil under ponderosas. Is your soil only recommended for areas similar in soil to that area? So we definitely have a lot of heavily duffed areas in Colorado Springs. So the duff is that layer of pine needles that fall from the ponderosas. So in the higher elevations in the southern parts of Colorado Springs, I would say that our soil is very similar to what yours would be in Monument. Really, I'd say just look around at what you're trying to plant in the area that you're trying to put the plant material. So if you are noticing that your soil is a little higher in organic material, then go ahead and use a little bit more organic material. I really would say a lot of the successes that we've had have just been from observation. You'll see a lot of the pictures that we had in the slideshow. My crew was out in the field, and it has truly just been a lot of us kind of wandering around the woods and closely looking at everything and how it grows. So I would recommend doing that and trying to just kind of copycat nature. Do I have any experience propagating hemp dogbane or wild licorice? I'm interested in propagating natives that spread vegetatively. Unfortunately, we haven't done either of those. I'm really focusing on the things in Colorado Springs that I'm finding abundantly. That way I can just kind of put back what I'm finding around. But I would encourage you to go and find some wild licorice or some hemp dogbane and pay attention to what that soil mix is that it's growing in, and then wander around your soil yard. You can absolutely do that and just kind of see what things look similar to the soil and try and recreate that. And then Maggie said, January 17th, we have 63 registrations. So awesome. Can fit about 70 people in the greenhouses before it feels a little cramped.
Great. I
Great.
just want to interject for a second and say, like, every time we talk to people, we reach so many more people. Like, these are the most highly attended events of 2022. And it's really just been this exact conversation we're having right now. Thank you so much for being here. Like, this is the movement of the future. And I just want to put my scholarly perspective that this is changing. This is having a climate change effect, right? By not employing peat and by plant revegetating our landscape, we are creating a carbon sink and reducing our carbon sources. And this is a very important, like, big picture part of what we're talking about. And also Alex's efforts I see as like a huge win in water quality, because we have huge water quality issues here. And that this is one way we can solve like runoff problems in our very tenuous geological environment.
Yeah, and I would also like to thank Alex for coming up here to the northern tier and speaking to us folks in the northern chapter. We've got a really active native plant community and a lot of growers. And right now, I know there are people in our audience who are going to be growing plants for our native plant swap, which is going to occur sometime in June. We're not sure when, we haven't scheduled that yet. And I'm looking forward to trying his method of using the soil blocks. And I hope that some of you people who are in attendance here will try it out too. And And maybe we can decrease our use of plastic. So
And
thank you. Thank you very much, Alex.
of course, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to put my email address for work in here. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. I'll warn you that sometimes my email gets a little bogged down and I'm slow to respond, but I do try to respond to everybody. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Well, I see one last question here. Anne Marie Fussell says, can we have Alex in the city of Fort Collins? Question mark, question mark.
Let them know and I'll move up there.
It would be nice if we had a city horticultural complex of that size, but we don't.
Honestly, we're so lucky in the Springs that we have something like that. It's huge. And the other thing that's kind of exciting about it is I actually grow in General Palmer's greenhouses. So he had a castle in Colorado Springs and he donated his greenhouses to the city in 1907 before he died. So it's pretty exciting that we get to be in cool historic structures like that.
Wow.
And I do want to just pipe up and say, Alex has recently joined the CONIPS board, and we welcome him in that leadership position. And what we are trying to do right in these conversations is to enable others to act, right? To motivate your chapter, to organize yourselves. And essentially what this looks like is, putting these kinds of hands-on efforts on your chapter calendar. Down here, we've had roughly monthly engagements of various kinds that focus on native plant gardening, and we partner with wild ones. And I just think that you guys can make this happen. And like Alex said, you don't have to have greenhouses. You just need to organize yourselves. And Anne Marie has the seeds, and Alex reduced his soil budget from $6,000 to $600 by employing the road base as the main component. And so you can also do that with a low budget, and you have subvention funds. Your chapter has money. And so if you wanted to engage in this process, you are able to do that and be supported by the structure of the CONIPS organization and your membership dollars. Thank you so much for becoming a member.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming.